The first sign of trouble came on a quiet morning by the lake, a moment that should have felt peaceful instead felt watched. Mark had moved to the edge of town for one reason: silence. His private lake sat behind his cabin like a mirror, calm and untouched. Fishing there was his ritual, a way to breathe again after years of noise and loss. But lately, a woman from the nearby HOA had been appearing at the fence, arms crossed, eyes sharp. She said the lake violated community standards. Mark ignored her at first. He owned the land. The permits were legal. The water rights were his. What Mark didn't know was that this woman, everyone quietly called her Karen, was planning something reckless. She believed rules mattered more than people. And she believed this lake belonged to her neighborhood, not him. That morning, Mark noticed dead fish floating near the shore. The water smelled wrong. His heart dropped as a sick thought formed. Someone had tampered with it. As he stared across the water, he had no idea this act wouldn't just hurt him. It would expose a truth so shocking that an entire town would soon be forced to confront it, and the HOA had no idea what they had just triggered. Mark called environmental services before anger could take over. He stayed calm, even as panic spread through his chest. The lake wasn't just water to him, it was history, peace, survival. Officials arrived, took samples, and quietly exchanged looks that told him this wasn't a simple issue. By afternoon, word spread fast. Neighbors whispered. Karen stood confidently near her porch, telling anyone who would listen that illegal fishing activities had finally been stopped. She smiled as if she'd won. What she didn't know was that the lake wasn't isolated. Years ago, during a drought, Mark had allowed the town to connect emergency water lines to his lake. It was legal, documented, and still active. The connection had never been removed. When test results came back, the room went silent. A chemical had been introduced into the water. Not enough to cause immediate disaster, but enough to contaminate every line connected to it, that included the town's backup water supply. Mark felt cold. This wasn't just about fish anymore. It wasn't even about him. The mistake Karen made out of spite had crossed into something much bigger. And when officials asked who had access to the lake, all eyes turned toward the HOA. The truth was rising, and it wasn't going to stay quiet. The town meeting was packed. People stood along the walls, arms folded, fear written across their faces. Karen arrived late, confident as ever, assuming this was another complaint she could dismiss. Then the environmental officer spoke. Clear. Calm. Devastating, the lake had been poisoned deliberately. The substance matched something used in common property treatments. HOA storage logs were requested. Karen's expression shifted for the first time. Mark sat quietly in the back. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The documents did that for him. Gasps filled the room when the officer confirmed the lake fed into emergency reserves used by the entire town. Parents clutched each other. Seniors looked stunned. This wasn't a rule violation, it was negligence with consequences. Karen tried to speak. Her voice cracked as she insisted she was protecting property values. But the room had changed. People weren't listening anymore. They were realizing how close they'd come to a disaster. When asked if she authorized the chemical use, Karen hesitated. That pause said everything. The meeting ended without applause. Without shouting. Just heavy silence. And in that silence, everyone understood this story wasn't ending here. It was only moving forward. Investigators arrived the next morning. HOA records were seized. Water lines were shut down. Emergency alerts went out. The town moved fast, correcting a problem that never should have existed. Karen stayed inside her house. The confidence was gone. Replaced by fear. She hadn't meant to hurt anyone. She only wanted control. But intent didn't erase impact. Mark was finally asked to speak. Standing by the lake, he explained its history, the agreement, the trust he had placed in the town. His voice didn't shake. That made it worse. News cameras showed the water, now still again. Headlines spread quickly. Not as outrage, but as disbelief. The HOA released a statement blaming miscommunication. No one accepted it. The town had learned something painful: power without understanding is dangerous. Karen resigned that afternoon. No speech. No apology. Just a signature and silence. As cleanup crews worked, Mark watched the water slowly return to clarity. The lake would recover. But reputations wouldn't, and while the town moved on, one lesson stayed behind: rules mean nothing without responsibility. Weeks passed. The town stabilized. Water systems were cleared. Trust, however, took longer. People spoke differently at meetings now. They listened more. Mark never sought attention. He refused interviews. He didn't want revenge. He wanted peace. One evening, a neighbor stopped by the fence. Thanked him. Another followed. Then another. Slowly, the lake became a symbol not of ownership, but of shared consequence. Karen moved away quietly. No farewell. Just an empty house and a story people would tell carefully. Mark returned to fishing. Same chair. Same calm. Different weight. He had learned that standing your ground doesn't require shouting. Sometimes it only requires truth and patience, and as the sun reflected off the water, Mark knew one thing for sure. What began as harassment had revealed something far more important: not every battle is about winning. Some are about preventing the wrong person from having unchecked power. Months later, the town updated its policies. Transparency became mandatory. No single person could make decisions that affected shared resources again. Mark was invited to join the advisory board. He declined politely. He didn't want authority. He wanted balance. The lake remained open, quiet, clean, protected. A reminder of what happens when ego overrides empathy. People still talked about that day. About how close things came to going wrong. And about how one man's calm response changed everything. The story spread online. Not as drama, but as warning, and somewhere in that lesson was the real twist. This was never about an HOA Karen. It was about accountability, the kind that arrives too late for some, but just in time for others. Looking back, the town understood how fragile systems really are. How one decision, made in anger, could ripple outward. Mark never framed himself as a hero. He simply acted responsibly when others didn't. And that made all the difference. The lake still reflects the sky. Still feeds the land. Still offers silence to those who seek it, and that was the final twist in this unbelievable HOA story. If you loved the drama, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment sharing your thoughts. It really helps this channel grow.